Okay. I'm interviewing Pastor Ernie Green at Christian Life Center in Layton, Utah. The first question is, how did you get into leadership at the beginning?
How did I get into leadership?
Or what brought you into it?
Well, you know, I think that leadership, there's things to be learned about leadership. Part of it is a learning experience, I think. But also, I think leadership is something that is part of you. I look back on my life, and one of the first, you know, when I was a kid, we always had to work during the summer. We didn't get to just take the whole summer off. So we would be doing something that Dad would assign us to for a summer job at the house. And we didn't have a basement on our house. And so my dad, we needed another bedroom because there was 3 boys and only a 2-bedroom house, and there was 2 girls. So we had to dig a basement, and I was like 12, my brother was 9, and my other brother was like 6. And so we dug a basement that summer. We crawled under the house and started digging this basement, used a tricycle and buckets to haul dirt out from under there, and we dug a full basement.
Wow.
And it took us all summer. There was this huge pile of dirt out behind the house into the summer. But what was, you know, my family talks about it still. We'd be digging in there, and then I'd be talking to other kids that were all got to go play, but I'd convince them that that was a neat place to play in the dirt. And sometimes I'd have 7, 8, 9 kids under there digging away, digging this basement, and I'd be directing everybody and showing them what to do and giving assignments. And I used to, I don't know, it's just something I always fell into, was being a leader in some way or another. And so I think that I got into leadership kind of naturally. And then, of course, when you become a pastor, you're automatically looked to as a leader. And my first really big leadership job was when I was in Brazil. And I'd gone down there to help a missionary. There were problems on the mission field, and all the missionaries were pulled out, and he was sent down to straighten it out and bring unity to the field and all that kind of thing. And so the mission sent me down to help them because he was an older guy and needed a lot of help. And so I went down to help him, and after I was there about 3 months, he got sick, and they brought him home. Now I've got that whole thing to take care of and to work with that, and I was just kind of thrust into the middle of it. And of course, I'd already been a pastor before then, and then worked in a church and things of that nature. But I, you know, was kind of thrust into leadership, and so I had to work at it and struggle at it and learn and grow and read, and I read a lot of books about leadership. Back then we didn't have John Maxwell back then. We didn't have,
I'm reading one for this class.
yeah, and so we didn't have a lot of leadership books back then, as far as being able to learn and grow. There just wasn't there wasn't usually a class on leadership in the colleges that I went to, in Bible college and all of that. So there was one of the old business leadership styles that was around. I can't think of the name right now, but I took some of that and used that kind of thing. But I think there's natural talent as far as, or gifts, not talent, but giftings of leadership, and then hopefully we get put into positions of leadership, and then we grow in those positions. So it's kind of a combined thing.
Okay. How did you know that you wanted to be a pastor or preach God's word?
You know, that's a tough one because I remember when God called me to preach. I was in the Philippines, and I was in the Air Force. And being there in the Philippines in the Air Force, I was getting out in about 6-8 months, and I was studying electronics because that's where I'd gone to school for before I went in the Air Force. And so I was studying electronics in the evenings, trying to get my mind refreshed to go back home and try to get a job in electronics. And one night I'm just sitting there at my desk, and I'm opening my electronics book, and it's like the Lord just spoke to my heart. And he said, "Why are you studying electronics?" I said, "Well, you know," and this is more of an inside conversation, you know. And I said, "Well, I want to go back to the States, and I want to be able to have a job, and I want to get some more education in electronics, and I'm just kind of reviewing it." And then he just said in my heart, he just said, "Study my word." And I took that as a call to preach and to become a pastor or missionary, that kind of thing. And so when I did, I was all excited. I thought, God's called me to preach. So I went to my pastor the next Sunday, as soon as I got off, and went to church that Sunday and right outside of Clark Air Base. And I went and I said, "Pastor," I said, "God's called me to preach." And he looked at me and he said, "Well, preach," and walked off. That's all he said. You know, and I thought, well, I kind of expected something a little different, you know. But so I did. I started going downtown in Angeles City and stand on a street corner and started preaching, and I'd get people together and preach to them and have an altar call and started teaching Sunday school in the church and doing those kind of things. And I think that's one of the things about preaching. When God calls you to preach, you want to preach. And when he's called us, you know, we'll make a way to preach. We'll find a way. And I think that's what he was talking about. A lot of people talk about being called to preach, but never get around to preaching. You know, they do a lot of talking about it, but they never go teach, they never go lead, they never go do anything. So I felt real positive that God had called me to preach. And so then there's a long story about all that. I stayed in the Philippines and became an assistant missionary, and a lot of things took place. But that was the calling. When I called my mom, I said, "Mom, God's called me to preach." And my mom just started laughing. She just died laughing. And the reason she laughed was I was one of the most shy kids of our whole family. I wouldn't even get up to talk. I was embarrassed to say anything in front of people. It was tough, you know, to be in front of people. And then God to call me to preach for Mom, that was ridiculous, you know. But, you know, God gives you the desire and you have a heart for it. You start moving that direction and God opens doors. And then the other side of preaching and any gifting actually is if other people recognize the gift in us. It's not just us saying, "Yeah, I'm called to preach. It doesn't matter what other people think." It's like a singer, you know. Somebody says, my gift and talent is singing. Well, if people can't stand your singing, maybe that's not your gift.
Right.
But God opened doors, and I've pastored now and been in the full-time ministry for over 45 years. So it's been quite a journey. Yeah.
Well, that kind of leads me to this next question. What led you to be a pastor instead of a missionary or an evangelist? But I guess you were a missionary.
I started out as a missionary first. In fact, I discharged out of the Air Force, didn't come home. Stayed there, and the Lord provided a way for me to do that. And I stayed there, but I wasn't, at that point, hadn't been to Bible school, hadn't gotten any kind of ministerial licensing or anything of that nature. So what I did is I became a Filipino pastor. That was my first license to preach, as a Filipino pastor. And so then I taught in the Bible school there, and I was taking courses by correspondence from the States, from the Bible school. And so I studied there, and I was, they let me be the pastor over the Bible school church. And so that's where I started preaching and teaching and working in the school there. And then I was work as an evangelist, traveling around to the different villages and up in the mountains to some of the tribal people and things of that nature.
So you've done all three?
Yes, I've done all three. I have. Started out as a missionary, and then I went to Okinawa from there, and they asked me to pastor a servicemen's home and church. And so I was there for several years, pastoring that church in Okinawa. Then I came back to the States and became a youth pastor, actually, at a church in California. And it was there God called me to go to Brazil. So I was missionary again. And then I came home from Brazil and was pastoring. Now I've pastored for all these years.
Wow, that's a very interesting story.
So it's quite a lot of twists and turns
Yeah.
in my life. And lot of things done maybe backwards. I don't know, but it all started with God laying that on my heart and put it in my heart to want to be a preacher and to want to be a missionary and follow Christ. And I grew up in a church where men didn't go to church. Back in the days when I was a kid, hardly any guys went to church. And so I didn't want to go to church. I didn't think church was a guy place to be. I'd rather be hunting and fishing than going to church. And my dad got saved, and then he made sure all of us kids went to church. But still, there weren't hardly any guys there. But when I went to the Philippines in the service, I met a bunch of missionaries. And I found out that real men love God and serve God and wanted to be, in fact, one of them gave his life there in the work of the mission while I was there. And so I saw, being a man and being a missionary and a pastor in a whole new light, even being a Christian in a whole new light. And so that challenged me, and I really looked up to those guys when I got to know them. I mean, they were amazing men over there preaching and teaching and traveling and working for God.
That's good. Seems like they were there on purpose.
Oh, for
you.
me, they were
Yes.
there, but a lot more
God
than
used
just
it.
me, but
But
God
yeah,
used it,
but
yeah.
used it for you.
He did, yeah.
Cool. That's cool. That kind of makes me think not to put it all in one slot, that one specific thing only I could go do. Since you
And
did
I
all
think
of
that's a
them.
huge mistake, is to think that there's only
Yeah.
one thing you can do, because, the gifts and the callings of God are in His hands. And there's no telling where God can lead your life. No
Yeah,
telling
and
at
it's all intertwined really, because
It is.
you are doing all those things in any one of those positions.
Right,
So,
right. Now I'm still in the ministry, I hardly ever preach anymore.
right.
But I do counseling and teach. Right now I'm teaching a Sunday school lesson and do pastoral care, that kind of thing. But it's all ministry.
Mhm.
And sometimes we're preaching in ways we don't even imagine. Preaching, I think sometimes we only see preaching as standing behind a pulpit on
Mhm.
Sunday morning. And I think preaching's a much broader subject than that.
Yeah, 24/7,
Mhm.
people are watching.
Sure.
Yeah, definitely. Is there anything specific that prepared you for this job that happened in your life prior to being in ministry?
Absolutely. Several things happened that I can look back over my life and know that God was getting me ready for it before I even imagined it. And actually before I even committed my life to Christ. The Bible says, those He foreknew, He predestined. And God, He knows what He's going to do in our life before we even consider Him. And so when I was in school, in high school, I had to take a certain class that I hated. And it was a class on Greek and Latin word roots. And I had to memorize sheets of word roots, Greek and Latin word roots. That's all it was. There was it was the dullest, most boring class you ever did. 'Cause all you did was just memorize these word roots, and I had to memorize them, and then we get tested on them every week. And I hated that class, and I don't like to memorize anyway, but I did the class and got through it. But what I didn't know at the time is that God was getting me ready to speak Portuguese, because those Latin word roots are all in the Portuguese language. So I was able to learn enough of the language in just 3 months after I got there to begin to preach a little bit and give my testimony in Portuguese, plus do, just general conversation. But I learned the language really well. The Lord just really prepared me for that, because I was thrust into that situation, and I needed to be able to speak Portuguese really well, not just halfway. And so the Lord really prepared me for that. And then also when I got out of high school, I went to electronics school, and I was studying about electronics, learning all about it and all that kind of thing. And so I thought, well, I'll go in the Air Force and I'll get more training in electronics. Well, I go in the Air Force, and of course the recruiter said, "Oh yeah, we'll let you be in electronics." Well, when they put me in there, they said, "Oh, you don't qualify for electronics." And when I got A's in school, I worked at a TV repair shop. "No, you don't qualify for that. You're gonna be a medic." So I became a medic. But what I didn't know at the time was that I was gonna become a missionary one day. And I needed to be able to fix my own electronic devices, and I needed to know a lot about medicine because I was out in the jungle. And so I learned a lot about medicine, I learned a lot about electronics, and I used every bit of it as a missionary.
That's awesome.
So yeah, God was preparing me. And of course my parents made sure I grew up in church and Sunday school and all that kind of thing. But yeah, there's lots of things in there that I knew God was getting me ready.
Amen. When you do preach a sermon, where do you get your ideas, or how do you get them?
Well, I think everybody has to go about that a little differently. To me, the way I go about sermons is that if I'm in the Word, reading the Bible, reading books, open to it, as I'm reading, sermon ideas come to mind. And so whenever I get a sermon idea, I make a note of it. You know, where I see it, what points come to mind at the time, what the message is about. And I just call them sermon seeds. And I just take those and I write them down as they come to mind and make a record of them so I can still continue my reading. And then later, when I know I've got to preach or something's coming up, then I look through those and I pray about it and see if something like that, or he may just give me a whole new one too, I don't know. But usually it comes through something like that. I'd spark something, or I'll be hearing somebody else preach and some ideas will come to mind about maybe a thought they give out that I could develop into a sermon of my own or whatever. And so those kind of things come about. And so I look at that and put it together and come up with some ideas that would make a sermon, and my points and intro and my conclusion, and put it together.
Okay. Are you fulfilled doing this work?
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't know what else I'd want to do. I tried to get out of the ministry for a while. My wife didn't want me in the ministry. She tried to get me to get an outside job, a secular job, and I really tried to. I went and tried to get interviews, tried to find something else that would support our family, and tried to quit altogether. And but I couldn't find a job, and every time I turned around, I was getting offered a job working in the church. And that's how I ended up here. I was looking for a secular job, and the Lord opened this job up to me, and so I've been here now 15 years. But it's I've felt a lot of fulfillment, and I'm not sad that I've given my life to the ministry, and I'm glad that I did. But it's been a journey. I've made mistakes. Things haven't always been like I want them, and nor have I done things like I should have done them all the time. And it's been a growing process and developing, and but it's been a good journey. I'm not sorry that I went into the ministry.
What are the biggest challenges you've faced in ministry?
In the ministry, I think early on, one of my biggest challenges in preaching was coming up with sermons. Being able to figure out how to craft what my way of doing it. I tried to copy some other people trying to do it and do it the way they did it, and it just didn't work for me. It didn't work out well at all, and it took me a while to figure that out and to get comfortable with making sermons and feel like I was doing a good job. So I've worked really hard at sermonizing and studied hard, studied other people's styles, tried to work hard at developing my own, and it's a challenge. I love to preach, but I'm not crazy about the preparing to preach. The preparing's a lot of work, and it's not my favorite thing to do. But I do, once I get it together and I'm able to preach it, I enjoy preaching it. And so but that's been a challenge for me. I think Another challenge for me has been to my own walk with the Lord, to keep it separate from the ministry. There can be a danger of letting the work of the ministry be my walk with the Lord. You know, studying for sermons, preparing for lessons, but my own personal feeding on the Word. Sometimes it's a challenge to keep that up, separate from, well, there's a sermon idea, there's something I can use, instead of, now that really speaks to me. There's a book I'm reading right now called Soul Keeping by John Ortland. And that book made me realize that I haven't always been really good at keeping my own soul. I was busy helping other people and their walk with the Lord and their own soul. But I don't know that I really did the job I should have done in keeping my own soul. And so I think that's an area that I could have done better in, and kind of wished I'd read that book a long time ago. Yeah.
Well, what are the biggest rewards to all of it?
Oh, rewards are huge. I think that some of of course, the reward of sensing that I did something for God. You know, I did something that furthered His kingdom, that made a difference. And it's important to me to make a difference in people's lives. If it's not going to make a difference in people's lives, then I've got no desire to do it. And so the rewards have been seeing people get saved, seeing people grow in Christ, seeing people go into the ministry, out of our ministry. That's been an amazing thing. Also to grow personally, to learn more about God. I mean, I get the opportunity to be in the Word more than most people. You know, the opportunity to spend all day. I had a guy say to me one time, get a real job. They didn't think preachers should get paid to just go stay in and sit in an office and study and talk to people and all this kind of thing. But I think that it's been a real blessing to be able to take all that time and study and pray and learn and grow and just be there. But to be there for people, I think, and to counsel people, marriages, struggles, hurts, to be able to share the grace of God to them in times like that is a real honor and a real privilege.
Do you like your leadership role? It's kind of already answered.
You know, where I'm at right now, you mean? My
Yeah.
leadership role?
Yeah, the role right now.
I like it. But I've been doing this a long time. I think years ago I would not have been happy with my role right now, because I wanted to preach. I wanted to be the leader. I wanted to be in charge. I think there's something, though, that I think is missed. They're talking about it more nowadays than they used to. Usually it used to be in the old days, God calls you to preach, you go pastor a church. You become the leader. Yeah. I think that I am a better helper than I am a leader. I can lead. I do lead. My leadership style is more of a servant leadership. I took the DISC personality test. And when I took it, I was really ticked. I was not happy because, the D is the CEO, the decision maker, the leader, and I was, it's DISC. And so my top number was S. And my second, right up near it, was I. The S is more of a peacemaker, bringing people together, team builder. The I is more of, let's have fun while we're doing it. And the C is the detail person. Well, all three of those were above the middle on me, and the D was all the way at the bottom. I mean, I had no D whatsoever, hardly. And I was really ticked. I was upset, and then I came to realize that leadership is different and styles are different, and it's okay to be different. You don't have to be this high profile, hey everybody follow me, here we go. I think that that's why I've had a job here, is Pastor Crowder is a high D, and I'm the other side of that coin. And so I have a job here that I feel really blessed to have, because I can provide that other side.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I do pastoral care and counseling and those kind of things. So I think the gift of helps is one of my strongest gifts. But I'm happy with it now. I think before I would have been dissatisfied with it. But I think I do more helping than trying to be the leader. I think I can provide more in this role. And I'm more comfortable with it. I don't mind it. I really don't. I don't necessarily want to be the leader. I want to make another leader successful. And that's my goal, is to make Pastor Crowder successful, to support him, be here for him, pick up the load, make it possible for him to, set the vision and to look to the future and do those things. And I free him up to do that, because I take care of the details.
That's good.
And I can do all that other, but I find I'm real comfortable doing what I do. And I like being, I always wanted to be an associate pastor. I didn't really want to be the pastor, and I always was. Just like in Brazil, I got thrust into being the leader. And that was not my goal or my desire. And now for the last 15 years, I've been able to support and be an associate, and I'm enjoying it.
Good. Last question.
Mm-hmm.
I guess this would be like more when you were pastoring a church.
Mm-hmm.
How many hours did you work a week?
Well, I tend to be a workaholic, which is problematic, and I tend to, I think you can work smart and work long, and it can be the opposite. I think I let people take too much of my time when I was pastoring, because I wanted to help everybody and do all this stuff, and then I would have to work on my sermons late in the week, and I made a mistake by doing that, and I let myself, well, I'm working hard for God, and so I put in all this time, but my family suffered for it. And I think that was a mistake. I think a person in the ministry should work. I've known of pastors that don't work. They go to church the morning, read the paper, go for coffee, wander around, not highly organized, don't really have their act together. I think that's wrong.
Yeah.
I think if you're going to be in the ministry, you work at it. And if you're going to be successful, you're going to have to work at it. But I also think that you can go the other extreme, and I think I did that. I just put in a lot of hard hours, and I have had some success because of some of that, but I think there were times that I was beyond what I should have been. And some days, 7 days a week without time off, and without the family time we should have had. And that was a mistake. That was not wise at all, and that kind of goes back to soul keeping and a bunch of things like that.
Yes, I know what you mean. I did the same thing, even though I wasn't a pastor, but I was using up all of my time helping, like in lots of different roles in the church, and my family suffered for that.
It's easy to do, and we've got a good reason to do it. It's
right.
for God.
It's like, well, I'm doing this for God. It can't be wrong.
But, and that
and
doesn't
saying
make
yes
it right.
to everything, and no.
Yeah, it's, I like that somebody said we have to say no to some things so that we can say yes to other things. Yeah. And I think that I let people, I think I wanted to be needed. I don't know that it was always for God, but I wanted to be needed. I wanted to do a good job, and I think maybe sometimes a lot of my personal value was wrapped up in it. So on Judgment Day, I don't know how much of it will be wood, hay, and stubble, and how much of it will be gold and silver. We'll see. Only God knows the answer to that.
Right. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.